That's better. Hi, everyone. My name is Luca. I'm in charge of our staking operation at Serenita, and I'm here today to talk to you about how to pick a site safely whenever clients end up disagreeing. So we'll first talk about what it actually means for clients to disagree when that happens. Then we're going to talk about what's at stake when that happens. And lastly, we'll look into ways how you can pick a site safely. So clients disagree sometimes. This is the happy day scenario where we have a blockchain, we have blocks coming in, and all clients follow the same chain. But there are scenarios where some clients don't agree with other clients on which chain is valid, and in that case, we end up with having two different forks or even multiple more forks. What happens here is that on the blue chain, we have block 3A, which was proposed by one of the clients. And for some reason, like client A thinks that block is valid, but client B thinks that block is not valid. So client B basically refuses to follow chain 3A and so on. And it also refuses to build blocks on top of block 3A. And that ends up in this kind of forky scenario where we have two different chains. And yeah, and different clients are going to follow those chains. Do clients actually ever disagree? Does this thing happen in practice? This is an overview of consensus bugs that have happened since Ethereum transitioned to the proof of stake system. You can see it was quiet there for a while between 2020 and 2024, but these bugs do happen. We've seen a few, especially in January of 2024 was kind of an interesting month where Besu and Nethermind hit consensus bugs on mainnet shortly after one another. Not all of those bugs that are listed here made it all the way to mainnet. Some of them only made it to testnet or were discovered even before. But yeah, we do have these client bugs. They are a reality. So why is that a big deal? It is a big deal because Ethereum is in a proof of stake era, and that means validators actually have something at stake. And the way this at stake thing works is if a validator does something that looks like an attack on the network, they stand to lose that stake. And when you as a validator vote for an invalid chain, that may look like an attack on the network, and you stand to lose what you have at stake. And how bad exactly this gets depends on how much of the network is voting for such an invalid chain. If we only have like 20% of the network voting for an invalid chain, basically no issue at all. No issue at all. But once you go higher, 40%, there are already certain edge cases that can happen where validators stand to lose like 22% of their stake. And the worst case scenario is what we've seen on Holeshki earlier this year, on the Holeshki testnet, also mentioned by Lion just now. And that basically, in that scenario, most validators would lose 100% of their stake because they voted for that invalid chain. So we don't want that to happen on mainnet, right? So how do you actually choose a side? Turns out it's difficult. Worst case, like all clients end up on the wrong chain, right? But let's not go that far. Let's just assume some clients are on the correct chain, some clients are on the invalid chain. It's still difficult to determine which chain to vote for. You'll see messages like these in your logs. This is basically indecipherable. You know something's wrong, but you don't know which side is actually correct. And yeah, the thing is, it also, from this state, from the moment you see these kinds of things in your logs, it can take the core devs a while to figure things out. So in case of the Holeshki testnet incident, like everybody was on standby because it was during a network upgrade. Everyone was already online. It took like about an hour to figure out which clients were in the wrong. So yeah, it'll take a while in practice. So I'm going to begin with a couple of less safe ways to go about this. The first way is like, this is like a very basic setup, right? You have a single execution layer client, a single consensus layer client, and a validator client. And in this case, your validator is going to do whatever this client pair decides is valid. So this approach is only safe if the client pair you happen to choose follows the correct chain, right? Many home stakers run like this, not a fault at all. If you do need to run this kind of system for any reason at all, the safest options you can take is to run a minority client pair. So basically, try to choose the clients that are run by as few other people than you as possible. Then we have the fallback client pair option, which is used by a lot of people, also professionals. And the thing about this setup, which we'll get to, is this is what it looks like. You have a primary client pair, you have a secondary client pair. You could have even like a tertiary and multiple pairs down there. The way this kind of setup works is your validator follows your primary client pair by default, but when it notices your primary is unhealthy or something, it switches to the fallback. In the case that your primary client pair ends up on the wrong fork, you're basically no better off than you were in the first case, where you only run a single client pair. So it doesn't really help that much so far, but what's even more dangerous about this kind of setup is when this kind of forking scenario happens, and say your primary client pair is on a correct chain, which has low participation rate, and the secondary client pair is on the wrong chain, is on an invalid chain, your validator client may switch over to the fallback pair because it's like it sees more blocks than the primary client pair. Like the secondary client pair may look more healthy to your validator client than the primary, so it will switch over. And that could be dangerous in case of forking scenario. So that's why, yeah, this is probably the main takeaway I want you to get from this talk. It's dangerous in some cases to run this kind of fallback setup with different clients. Yeah, good for non-consensus bugs. So if one of the clients goes down, goes offline, that's fine. This is a good way to solve for that. But in case of consensus bugs, this is dangerous. Okay, now safely picking a side is difficult. Again, there's an asterisk there because there's no way to always pick a side safely. What if all the clients have the same bug, right? If there's no picking a side safely in that scenario. But let's focus on the more realistic things and what we can actually solve for. So, and what you can do better versus the previous approaches I mentioned is use a multi-node validator client. Multi-node validator clients are special in a way that they allow your validator to connect to multiple client pairs at the same time and basically combine their output. Like take a look at all of those client pairs and see how many of them agree on a chain. And basically, by default, multi-node validator clients can follow whatever the majority of client pairs agrees on. Yeah, so this kind of setup is actually safe as long as that threshold number that you can decide on follows the correct chain. You can take it a step further, run like 5 client pairs. You can run even 7 client pairs on Ethereum mainnet nowadays, and decide on whatever threshold you're comfortable with. So like if you're comfortable with 3 clients choosing some kind of chain and you want to follow that chain, that's fine. Yeah, so the threshold is configurable. Yeah, this is probably the safest thing you can do right now. In case you have heard of Vouch but not of Vero, I'm just going to explain the differences very quickly. The main thing is they both support this kind of attestation consensus mechanism where they talk to multiple clients, decide on their combined outputs. Vero has support for the Ethereum remote signing API, which is used by Web3 Signer, whereas Vouch doesn't. And Vero has this cool feature, which is built-in slashing detection, where it stops performing all validator duties as soon as it notices that any of its validators have been slashed. So it kind of prevents further validators from getting slashed in case you do misconfigure for some reason. I'm going to leave you with a couple of recommendations. Some of these are for home stakers. So here I would start with running a minority client pair. If you do have access to 2 machines or more, I'd say using a multi-node validator client is preferable over a fallback client pair. And yeah, if you do end up with a multi-node setup, it's still a good idea to run minority client pairs as part of that multi-node setup. And then for the professionals, I suggest really running at least 3 client pairs, defining a threshold that you're comfortable with. Again, prefer a multi-node setup versus a fallback setup. DVT is also an option nowadays. As of recently, it also correctly accounts for these kinds of things. Yeah, last bullet item there is a recommendation to temporarily increase your attestation consensus threshold around network upgrades, because those network upgrades are a bit of a more risky time when more consensus kind of bugs could show up. Yeah, so like a day before the upgrade, you'd increase the threshold, and a couple of days after the upgrade goes through successfully, you can just lower it wherever it was before. That's all from my side. Here's some links if you want to get in touch. If you want to run Vero, feel free to ask me any questions. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Excellent presentation, Luca. We actually do have one question in there for it, and I'm kind of curious if you could expand on this a little bit. Could you describe or contrast the differences between Vero and Vouch, or the two together, compared to DVTs? So Vero Vouch versus DVTs.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of this kind of information in the documentation, but Vero and Vouch are multi-node validator clients, whereas distributed validators are powered by like OBOL or SSV. The main difference between Vero and DVT is that with Vero, you have the key in one place. So you have the full validator key someplace. And with DVT, the key is like spread out in different locations. That's probably the main difference. There's also like a difference with Vero and Vouch. Vouch uses its own like signer called Dirk, and that signer allows you to also split up the keys into different locations. So it's like, it gets very technical very quickly. Yeah, Yorick?
I'm going to run the mic here.
Yeah, sure. So both OBOL and SSV now also do this kind of protection.
Yeah,
slightly different.
OBOL you need to opt in for now. That's
right,
important
exactly.
to know.
And of course the question is, who's running which client pairs? So the way I think about it is, if you're running the whole infra, then a Vero Web3 signer or a Vouch Dirk works great. And if you use DVT, that's just the same thing with an extra protocol and more steps and maybe a token. But if you are staking for someone and they say, I don't trust you, I want you to have 1/4 or 1/7 of the key, and I can't give you the whole key, then that's where DVT shines.
Yeah, yeah. DVT is like the best option if you have multiple node operators involved. And I think if you have only a single node operator taking charge of all the infrastructure, I think Vero and Vouch are simpler to set up. And Vero is part of ETHDocker, so yeah, I think Vero is the easiest option if your main goal is to protect from consensus bugs. And then, depending on your exact use case, you may go with Vouch or DVT. Yeah.
Excellent. Another round of applause.